Zuri had always known her name carried weight, though she had never fully understood its power until the day it was taken from her. In her village, names were sacred, whispered carefully over a child's cradle, believed to bind one's spirit to the earth, to the family and to the future. Her own name had been chosen with care by her mother, a name that meant radiance, and promised strength, wisdom and respect. But the mother who had loved her was long gone, and her father had remarried a woman whose heart was measured not in love or care, but in profit and convenience. Zuri, at 22, found herself caught in a scheme she could neither escape nor challenge. Her name had been sold to a wealthy merchant for a sum her stepfamily deemed sufficient to cover debts, desires and indulgences. The transaction had been simple, bureaucratic and heartless. Her stepmother, Marana, had arranged the sale under the guise of ensuring the family's survival, explaining that names were commodities, objects to be exchanged for wealth or favor. Zuri had protested, tried to remind them of the sacredness of her identity, but her words fell on ears that had long since ceased to listen. To her family she was a vessel, a tool, a negotiable piece of property, and when they handed her name over, it was as though they had handed away a portion of her very soul. The villagers, who had always revered names, recoiled in silent judgment, murmuring warnings and glances that Zuri felt more acutely than any words spoken aloud. Yet no one dared speak on her behalf, because the powerful merchant's influence overshadowed the village elders and because fear of Marana had rooted the community in cautious silence. From the moment her name was sold, Zuri experienced a strange, unbearable weight. She felt invisible in ways that went beyond social exclusion. When she entered the marketplace, merchants ignored her greetings, even as her eyes pleaded for acknowledgement. Children who had once run to her with curiosity now darted past her, pretending not to see her at all. Even friends she had grown up with stumbled over her presence, caught in awkward silence as though her very being had been erased from the collective memory. She walked through the village like a shadow tethered to no one, every step heavy with the loneliness of being recognized by none. The wind whispered her old name in scattered syllables, teasing her with echoes of what had been stolen, reminding her that she still existed somewhere, even if the world refused to acknowledge it. Zuri tried to speak, to assert herself, but it was as though the air itself swallowed her words. Her voice, once strong and vibrant, now felt fragile, brittle, a whisper that dissolved before it reached another's ears. It was not simply a matter of being ignored. The villagers seemed genuinely incapable of recognizing her, as if the sale had severed some invisible cord connecting her to the world around her. She discovered that names in her culture were more than labels. They were conduits for respect, recognition, and identity. Without hers, she became an anomaly, a ghost wandering among the living, her gestures and presence acknowledged only in fleeting glances, never in true connection. Despite the isolation and humiliation, Zuri refused to disappear entirely. She learned to navigate the village quietly, observing the movements of her stepfamily, the reactions of neighbors, and the subtle hints of sympathy from those who dared to acknowledge her in small ways. In secret, she practiced reclaiming herself, reciting her name silently, feeling its rhythm and strength in the hollow spaces of her days. Though her lips could not speak it aloud without drawing suspicion, the sound remained alive in her mind, pulsing with the power of identity and heritage. The sale of her name had been intended as punishment, a method to render her powerless and invisible, but Zuri began to understand that invisibility did not equate to weakness. Each unnoticed step, each ignored greeting, each silent observation allowed her to grow stronger, more aware, and more attuned to the subtle energies of the village she once thought she knew. Her name, though stolen, retained its essence within her, a hidden spark that no amount of greed or fear could extinguish. The villagers may have dismissed her, the merchant may have claimed possession, and her stepfamily may have gloated over their gain, but Zuri carried within her the quiet, unyielding knowledge that she still existed, that she still mattered, and that one day the world would be forced to remember her. Zuri moved through her days like a shadow, her presence barely acknowledged, her voice drowned by the indifferent murmurs of the village. Each morning, she awoke to the same suffocating routine. Her stepmother, Marana, barking orders that reinforced her place as a ghost within her own home, her stepbrother sneering as he reminded her of the usefulness of her silence. Tasks that had once been part of everyday life became instruments of humiliation, designed to remind her of her stolen identity. She fetched water from the river, cleaned the floors of the compound, and tended to the gardens, all while the villagers passed by as if she did not exist, their eyes sliding over her form without recognition or concern. At the marketplace, merchants no longer called her by name, no longer smiled when she approached. Even the neighbors who had once greeted her warmly now acted as though a thin veil separated her from the world, a veil woven from greed, fear, and the transaction that had stolen her name. She tried to catch someone's eye to elicit a response, but the effort felt like shouting into an empty cavern. The sound never reached anyone. Each act of dismissal, each polite avoidance, cut deeper than any physical punishment her stepfamily could inflict. The control they wielded over her identity had extended beyond the walls of their home, infiltrating every aspect of her existence, leaving her isolated, silent, and invisible. Yet, amidst the constant erasure, subtle signs began to emerge. In the quiet corners of the village, Zuri noticed small letters tucked under doors or slipped between fence posts. At first, she assumed they were intended for someone else, discarded notes carelessly hidden. But as the days passed, she realized they were meant for her, messages written with care, though never delivered openly. The letters were unsigned, containing only fragments of words or symbols, hints of recognition and encouragement, proof that her name, though stolen, still held meaning somewhere beyond the reach of her stepfamily and the merchant. Each letter carried a weight that stirred something deep within her. One contained a simple phrase in her mother's handwriting, preserved in faded ink: "The name belongs to you always." Another depicted a map of the village with small marks highlighting places where her presence had been noted, reminders that her identity, though suppressed, could not be erased entirely. These small interventions became lifelines, threads connecting her to a reality in which her voice and existence still mattered. Zuri began to anticipate the letters, checking the usual hiding places with a careful hopefulness. The letters gave her a sense of power and continuity, proof that the world beyond her stepfamily's control had not entirely surrendered to their selfishness. Each note reinforced the truth she had begun to understand. Her name, her essence, was more than a commodity. It carried memory, influence, and a force of recognition that transcended the transaction. In her stepfamily's eyes, she was nothing, a tool they could manipulate, a girl whose value had been reduced to currency. But the letters reminded Zuri that she was more than what they had taken. She was alive in ways they could not suppress, and her name, though stolen on paper and in the perception of others, still thrummed with life, hidden but unyielding. The daily humiliation, the exclusion, and the deliberate attempts to erase her identity became the crucible in which Zuri's resolve was forged. She learned to observe, to listen, and to read the signs that others could not perceive. Though her voice was silenced, her mind, her spirit, and her name, the true essence of who she was, remained intact, waiting for the moment when the world would be forced to acknowledge her once more. The letter arrived on a morning heavy with mist, sliding beneath the door of Zuri's small room as if it had moved of its own accord. Its envelope was thick, sealed with a dark wax stamped with the merchant's crest, a mark that had become synonymous with wealth, influence, and danger throughout the village. Zuri froze, her heart beating faster than it had in months, staring at the letter as though it might vanish if she dared touch it. Her stepfamily had no idea it had arrived, and even if they did, they would have tried to claim it immediately, eager to maintain their illusion of control over her stolen identity. Yet here it was, placed in the exact spot where only she would find it, as though the universe itself had chosen to deliver a message that could not be ignored. Hands trembling slightly, she broke the seal, releasing the faint scent of aged paper and ink. The handwriting inside was deliberate, ornate, and unfamiliar in a way that carried both elegance and unease. Zuri unfolded the letter and began to read, her eyes scanning the carefully penned words that seemed to ripple with unspoken intent. The merchant wrote of her name as if it were a living thing, acknowledging its power and the unusual potential it held within her. He did not treat it as a mere label as her stepfamily had. Instead, he wrote with reverence, caution, and a hint of fear. The first section of the letter revealed truths about her family that Zuri had never dared suspect. Her stepmother had orchestrated the sale not solely for greed, but to hide deeper failures and betrayals. Her father had been complicit, signing papers that bound Zuri's identity to wealth, perhaps thinking the transaction would secure his own safety or favor. The letter hinted at years of manipulation, alliances with merchants, and secret agreements that had ensured her family's prosperity at the cost of her very name. Each revelation cut sharply, a mixture of anger, disbelief, and clarity flooding through her. She realized that her stepfamily's cruelty had not been random. It had been calculated, deliberate, a strategy to control not only her but the perception of power she had always carried unconsciously. The letter went further, revealing hidden betrayals within the village itself. Certain elders had known of the transaction, of the power her name held, yet they remained silent to maintain their own authority. Traitors, neighbors, even childhood friends had observed, colluded, or ignored the theft, each choosing their comfort over justice. The letter's words formed a map of deceit that extended far beyond the walls of her home. Zuri felt the weight of this knowledge pressing on her chest, a mixture of horror and awakening. The village she had once believed she knew, the people she had trusted, had been complicit in erasing her existence. But the letter was not merely a recounting of treachery, it was a revelation of potential. The merchant, writing with careful attention, explained that her name was not simply stolen, it was borrowed. It retained its connection to her, its power dormant but responsive. He hinted at the consequences for those who had tried to exploit it, and the latent ability for the holder of the name to reclaim influence, command respect, and reveal hidden truths. As Zuri read these lines, her pulse quickened. Her name was more than letters on paper. It was a vessel of authority, of recognition, and even justice. The notion that a name could carry such force had always existed in the village's traditions, whispered over cradles and funerals alike, but now she understood it not as superstition, but as tangible reality. Zuri reread sections of the letter, memorizing its phrasing, absorbing its hidden instructions, and tracing the connections it made between her family, the merchant, and the village. The letter urged patience, strategy, and understanding. It did not demand immediate action, but it made clear that the power contained within her name, though dormant, would not remain so forever. Every word seemed to hum with anticipation, as if eager to awaken the truth it carried. For hours she sat in secret, reading and rereading, the outside world falling away. She realized that her stolen name was not a prison but a key. Every betrayal, every act of concealment, every act of dismissal had only strengthened the need for her to reclaim what was inherently hers. Her stepfamily's control, the villagers' fear, even the merchant's cautious respect. All these were threads in a web she could now begin to understand and navigate. By the time she set the letter down, Zuri felt a transformation within herself. The quiet, overlooked girl who had walked unseen through her own village was no longer powerless. The letter had reminded her of her lineage, her potential, and the fact that even stolen, her name had a life of its own. It was alive, waiting for her recognition, ready to shift the balance of power in ways that could not be ignored. Her eyes glinted with determination. She understood now that the world had underestimated her, and the secrets contained in this single letter were the first step toward reclaiming her identity and the respect and fear that had always been her right. Zuri sat beneath the dim light of a single lantern, the letter spread before her like a map of both revelation and reckoning. Each carefully written line, each elegant curl of ink, carried weight far beyond mere words. As she traced the letters with her finger, she began to understand something profound. In her culture, a name was never just a name. It was a vessel, a repository of memory, lineage, and truth. It carried the essence of the person it belonged to, their history, their intentions, their unseen influence upon the world. By selling her name, her family had attempted not only to strip her of identity, but to sever the connection between her and the world around her, to reduce her existence to something insignificant, malleable, and invisible. The letter explained this principle in layers of subtlety and depth. Names, when spoken or acknowledged, could summon memory, recall hidden truths, and even reveal the character of those who sought to wield them. To claim a name, as her stepfamily had done, was to attempt control over a force that was not entirely human. It was to think that identity, power, and essence could be traded like a commodity, when in truth they were alive, self-protecting, and responsive. Zuri felt a shiver run down her spine. The very letters of her name carried a resonance that refused to be muted. They vibrated with hidden power, linking her to the village, to her ancestors, and to a reality her stepfamily had never comprehended. As she continued to read, the letter unfolded layers of insight that left her both unsettled and exhilarated. Each passage revealed the hidden intentions of those who had bought her identity. Her stepmother's greed, her father's complicity, the merchant's cautious calculation. They were no longer abstract betrayals but living forces that interacted with the essence contained within her name. Every omission, every manipulation, every act of silence was recorded and amplified through the power of the name itself. Zuri could feel the weight of these revelations pressing into her mind, connecting dots she had only guessed at before. The letter made it clear that her stolen identity had always been alive, never passive, and that it had observed everything. The whispered conversations, the secret deals, the hushed schemes that had tried to erase her presence. With each paragraph, the letter seemed to pulse, guiding her awareness toward truths she had not consciously known. She began to see her name not as a casualty but as a weapon and a shield. Its power could illuminate deception, expose hidden sins, and restore balance to the injustices inflicted upon her. She realized that even the merchant who had purchased her name had treated it with caution because he understood that a name of true power could not be contained, could not be used without consequence. The letter was both a warning and a teaching, instructing her that reclaiming her identity was not merely personal, it was a matter of revealing hidden truths that affected every layer of the village, her family, and beyond. Zuri felt a surge of clarity as the final sections of the letter revealed the depth of the deception surrounding her. Every letter, every syllable of her name that had been taken, recorded intentions both conscious and unconscious. Her stepfamily's actions were laid bare, not just as acts of greed, but as attempts to manipulate the flow of power that her name inherently carried. The merchant's acquisition, once intimidating, now appeared as a cautious acknowledgement of potential he could not fully command. Every conspirator, every observer had underestimated the enduring essence of her identity. As she absorbed the knowledge, Zuri felt the first stirrings of empowerment. Her name, though outwardly stolen, had never truly left her. It lived within her thoughts, her gestures, and her perception. The letter had unlocked a new understanding. Her identity could not be erased, her essence could not be contained, and the very forces that had attempted to exploit her had only highlighted the strength and influence her name carried. Each hidden intention, each sin revealed, became a stepping stone toward reclaiming not just recognition, but authority and justice. By the time she folded the letter, Zuri's mind was alive with purpose. She no longer saw herself as invisible, no longer felt as though the world could ignore her. The hidden power of her name had been illuminated, and with that illumination came a responsibility, a duty to confront the betrayals, expose the lies, and ensure that the stolen essence of her being would not only return to her, but rise in force to challenge those who had sought to control it. Her name was more than identity, it was truth, memory, and power, waiting for the moment she would reclaim it fully. The night was thick with stillness, the kind that pressed against the skin and held the world in suspended anticipation. Zuri sat by the flickering lantern, the letter from the merchant spread before her like a sacred map. She had read it countless times during the day, tracing every line, memorizing every curl of the elegant handwriting, yet tonight something different stirred. A faint glow emanated from the parchment, soft and tremulous, as though the letter itself were breathing. Zuri blinked, convinced her eyes were playing tricks on her, but the glow persisted, pulsating with a rhythm that seemed to echo her own heartbeat. Then came the whisper. At first it was barely audible, a sibilant murmur that brushed against her ears, indistinct and fleeting. She froze, holding her breath, afraid to dismiss it as imagination. But the whisper returned, clearer this time, carrying syllables that felt impossibly familiar, as if they belonged to her very essence. Her name, or fragments of it, were woven into the sound, carried in a voice she could not place. The letter was speaking to her. Zuri's heart surged with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. Slowly, carefully, she reached out and touched the parchment. The glow intensified at her fingertips, warm and alive, and the whispers became words she could almost understand, phrases suggesting directions, places, and secrets hidden in plain sight. The letter, she realized with a thrill of revelation, was alive, infused with the power of her name. It was not simply a message from the merchant, it was a guide, a vessel of knowledge that responded to the recognition of her true identity. Following the subtle pull of the whispers, Zuri moved through the house, the letter clutched to her chest. It led her first to the study, a small room her stepfamily rarely entered. There, tucked beneath loose floorboards, she discovered a hidden cache of documents, ledgers detailing debts, trades, and secret agreements, all tied to the sale of her name and the manipulation of village affairs. The whispering grew louder, insistent, guiding her eyes to certain passages that revealed betrayals long buried. Her stepmother's clandestine meetings with merchants, her father's compliance in the deceit, and neighbors' quiet complicity. Every revelation was a thread, and the letter, alive with her essence, wove them into a tapestry of truth. The whispers then drew her to the attic, a place of dust and shadows where her stepfamily stored trinkets and treasures they did not want seen. As she climbed the creaking stairs, the glow from the letter seemed to illuminate the path ahead, casting pale light on the rafters and forgotten chests. Hidden among old papers and faded cloths, she found more letters, notes that had never been delivered, messages intended for her but intercepted by those who sought to suppress her presence. Each letter pulsed with recognition, resonating with the power of her stolen name, affirming that she had always mattered, even when the world tried to erase her. Zuri realized the whispers were not random, they carried intention, guiding her toward truths that could no longer remain hidden. Her stepfamily's greed, once cloaked in ordinary domestic authority, was exposed in its full extent. They had sold her name not merely for profit, but to control the flow of influence in the village, to manipulate the perception of her identity, and to silence the consequences of their own misdeeds. Even the villagers who had appeared indifferent were implicated, their complicity woven into the patterns of deceit revealed by the letter. The whispers confirmed that her name, even while taken, had remained a living force, capable of uncovering secrets, asserting influence and demanding justice. As she moved from room to room, the letter's glow adjusting to each step, Zuri felt a profound connection to her lineage. The merchant's note had been a key, but this living letter was more. It was a manifestation of her heritage, the power her mother had spoken of in hushed tones before her death. It reminded her that identity is not merely claimed on paper or spoken aloud. It is a force that lives in thought, intention, and recognition. Her stepfamily had tried to sever that force, but they could not. By midnight, Zuri returned to her room, exhausted but illuminated with understanding. The letter settled in her lap, its glow dimming slightly as though acknowledging the progress she had made. She realized that the whispers were not a temporary enchantment, but a guide for the reclamation of her power, a signal that her name's strength could not be ignored, suppressed, or stolen. It lived within her, connected to the world, to the spirits of her ancestors, and to the truths that demanded recognition. Zuri lay on her mat, the letter beside her, and for the first time felt the convergence of fear, knowledge, and empowerment. The night had revealed that her identity, though taken, was not gone. The letter had whispered truths, uncovered betrayals, and shown her that the power of her name was a force beyond her stepfamily's control. She understood that reclaiming it would require courage, strategy, and patience, but she also knew that the living letter would continue to guide her, each whisper a reminder that she was far from invisible, and that her presence carried power no one could take. Zuri's stepfamily had always relied on control and intimidation to maintain their authority over her. Marana, her stepmother, had perfected the art of commands and punishments, while her stepbrother, Jano, had learned to wield mockery and fear like blunt instruments. For years, their methods had succeeded. Zuri's silence, her submission, and the invisibility forced upon her had allowed them to assert dominance without challenge. But something had begun to change. Her quiet determination, the subtle ways she moved through the house and village, and her growing awareness of her own power did not escape their notice. At first, the change was nearly imperceptible to them. Zuri no longer flinched at Marana's sharp words. She carried herself with a steadiness that had not been there before, her gaze unafraid and observant. Small acts, like leaving tasks unfinished until her stepmother demanded them or returning their glares with unflinching eyes, began to unsettle the household. Marana's frown deepened and Jano's jokes faltered, replaced with tension and unease. It was as though Zuri, who had once been invisible, was suddenly visible in ways they could not anticipate or control. Then came the letter. The moment Marana glimpsed it, she sensed a threat she could not define. She attempted to snatch it from Zuri's hands, her fingers curling around the edges with force, but the letter resisted, slipping just out of reach as if it had its own will. Panic flickered in Marana's eyes, a glimpse of fear that Zuri had never seen there before. Jano, seeing his mother's hesitation, lunged as well, but the letter evaded him too. It shimmered faintly, revealing glimpses of truth in the process, snippets of their past betrayals, their secret trades, and their manipulation of village affairs. The parchment seemed alive with the essence of Zuri's stolen name, and every attempt to destroy it only made the revelations more vivid. Marana backed away, breathing hard, eyes darting nervously as she caught sight of ledger entries, hidden contracts, and intercepted letters materializing in ghostly form around the room. Each one bore witness to their schemes, their lies, their collusion with merchants and villagers alike. The arrogance that had defined her stepfamily for years began to crumble. The certainty that they could suppress Zuri, control her, and manipulate perception dissolved in the presence of the letter's living power. Zuri, holding the letter carefully, realized the shift in the atmosphere. Her stepfamily's confidence faltered under the weight of their own exposure. Marana's hands shook slightly as she clutched at her skirts, and Jano's bravado turned into a tight, brittle tension. Fear had replaced the arrogance that had once allowed them to dominate, and Zuri could sense it growing with every pulse of the letter's glow. The room was no longer theirs to command. The power had shifted, quietly but unmistakably, toward her. As the night progressed, the letter revealed even more. It displayed not just past betrayals but the long-term consequences of their greed and manipulation. Old debts, hidden favors, and misused authority were laid bare, each revelation forcing Marana and Jano to confront truths they had long ignored or dismissed. The whispers of the letter grew louder, insistent, echoing the voices of ancestors, witnesses, and the very village they had sought to deceive. Every attempt to ignore it only made the truths more impossible to evade. Zuri's calm confidence contrasted sharply with her stepfamily's panic. She did not raise her voice, did not demand recognition. She simply let the letter speak, letting the revelations unfold naturally. The fear that had begun to seep into Marana and Jano's bones made them glance nervously at each other, unsteady in a way they had never experienced. They had assumed control, but they had underestimated the living power of a name, the essence of identity that no amount of coercion or suppression could erase. By midnight the room had changed entirely. Where once there had been control, there was now tension. Where there had been arrogance, there was fear. Zuri's stepfamily realized that the balance had shifted irrevocably. The letter, infused with her identity and the power of her true name, had exposed the skeletons they had buried and made them tremble under the weight of their own deceit. And as Zuri held it close, her eyes steady and unyielding, she understood that fear was only the beginning. The power she carried, her name, her identity, her rightful essence, would continue to unravel the webs of lies, leaving her stepfamily to confront truths they had spent years trying to conceal. Zuri's hands trembled as she unfolded the next section of the letter, the dim lantern casting flickering shadows across the walls of her small room. The ink seemed darker here, heavier with meaning, as if each word had been deliberately weighted to land with impact. Her eyes moved carefully over the lines, absorbing a revelation that sent chills through her spine. Her stepfamily had not merely sold her name for petty profit or fleeting luxury, they had conspired to protect something far greater, something hidden, something dangerous. A treasure, long buried and fiercely guarded, had been the true motivation behind their betrayal. The letter traced the outlines of the conspiracy with meticulous detail. Her stepmother, Marana, had orchestrated the sale under the pretense of debt repayment, disguising the family's greed as necessity. Her father, though distant and weak, had signed papers that bound Zuri's identity to the merchant, unaware, or pretending to be unaware, of the implications. The treasure, concealed for generations, was tied to their lineage and to the very essence of power in the village. Its location, the letter explained, had been known to only a few trusted conspirators, but Zuri's stolen name had been a key to ensuring secrecy. By removing her name, they thought they could erase any claim she might have had to the treasure, leaving her powerless and invisible. Zuri's heart pounded as the letter revealed that the deception extended beyond her family. Certain villagers, neighbors who had once seemed friendly, had been complicit, their silence bought or coerced. The local priest, the merchants, even childhood friends, each had played a role in the elaborate scheme, aware that her identity carried influence that could expose their own greed. The layers of complicity were staggering, a web of deceit spun so tightly that Zuri could scarcely believe it had been orchestrated so meticulously. Each revelation was a blow, but also a spark, igniting a growing sense of empowerment. She could feel the weight of their collective arrogance pressing down, but it no longer intimidated her. The knowledge she now held gave her leverage and insight that her stepfamily and the villagers had never anticipated. Their greed had blinded them to the true strength of her name, the living power that persisted even after they had tried to sever it. Her identity, though temporarily obscured, had never been fully taken. It had remained alive, responding to her awareness, her determination, and now, the clarity provided by the letter. Anger surged through Zuri, sharp and immediate, but it was tempered by a quiet, deliberate resolve. She understood the depth of their deceit, the lengths to which they had gone to control and manipulate her, and yet she also recognized the opening that had been created. The treasure, the letters, the documents, and the complicity of the villagers, each was a piece of the puzzle, each an opportunity to reclaim what had been stolen. The letter had illuminated the network of lies, exposing the foundation of their power and revealing its vulnerabilities. Her mind raced as she began to consider the implications. She could confront them directly, but the letter suggested caution and strategy. Power, it implied, was not only in confrontation but in awareness, in knowing the threads that connected betrayal to consequence. Zuri realized that she had both the moral high ground and the knowledge to dismantle the entire scheme without losing herself to reckless anger. Each secret exposed was a step toward reclaiming her identity, her name, and the influence that had been denied her. By the time she set the letter down, Zuri felt a profound shift within herself. The fear, confusion, and humiliation that had defined her recent life had been replaced by clarity, purpose, and empowerment. The conspiracies that had seemed insurmountable were now tangible, identifiable, and, most importantly, addressable. She understood that her stolen name was not a limitation but a catalyst, a force that, once acknowledged and wielded with wisdom, could reveal truth, exact justice, and restore the balance that her family and the villagers had tried so desperately to disrupt. Zuri's eyes shone with determination as she gazed at the letter, realizing that knowledge was her first act of reclamation. Their greed, their lies, and their manipulation had all been laid bare, and she now held the understanding necessary to turn their deception against them. In that moment she felt a powerful certainty: the treasure they had sought to protect at her expense, and the identity they had tried to erase, would not remain hidden. She would uncover it all, reclaim her name, and let the world witness the consequences of their betrayal. The night had fallen heavy and quiet over the village, the kind of darkness that seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Zuri stepped onto the central square, the letter clutched tightly in her hands, its edges glowing faintly in the lantern light. Word of her presence had already spread through the narrow streets, carried by whispers of curiosity and unease. Her stepfamily, Marana and Jano, emerged first, their faces masks of arrogance, tinged with something sharper now: nervousness, a premonition of the reckoning that had been long denied them. Villagers gathered behind them, hesitant, unsure, as the tension in the air thickened with every passing second. Zuri took a deep breath, feeling the pulse of the letter in her hands. It was alive, resonating with her own heartbeat, and she could feel the power of her stolen name stirring in tandem with its words. She did not speak immediately. Instead, she let her gaze sweep across the crowd, taking in the faces of those who had ignored her, betrayed her, or watched in silent complicity as her identity was stolen. Marana's lips trembled, Jano's eyes darted nervously, and even some villagers who had feigned indifference could not hide their tension. Every gaze seemed to acknowledge the inevitable. Zuri had come to reclaim what was hers, and the night would not allow deceit to remain hidden. Then she began to read. At first, her voice was low, a soft hum that drew attention without commanding it. The letter's contents poured into the square, and with each word, the air seemed to thicken, charged with revelation. She read of the secret transactions, the hidden agreements, and the conspiracies that had entwined her family and villagers alike. The weight of truth pressed against them all, palpable and unavoidable, as though the very earth beneath their feet had begun to respond to the power held in her name. Marana stepped forward, attempting to interrupt, to reclaim control, but Zuri's eyes met hers and held her in place. The letter's glow intensified as if in response to her defiance, and her voice grew stronger, clearer, unstoppable. She read of the hidden treasure, the collusion with merchants, the complicity of neighbors and elders, all laid bare with unflinching precision. Secrets whispered in shadowed corners, intended to remain unseen, were now illuminated in the lantern's glow. Each revelation was a mirror, reflecting the true character of those who had attempted to suppress her, exposing cowardice, greed, and betrayal. Gasps rippled through the crowd as names, deeds, and intentions were recited. Villagers who had believed themselves untouchable faltered, their confidence crumbling in the face of undeniable truth. Zuri's stepfamily was paralyzed, Marana's face drained of color, Jano's bravado shattered into trembling uncertainty. They realized that their attempts to erase her, to render her invisible, had only heightened the impact of this night. The very act of suppression had created a force they could no longer control, and that force had returned to confront them in full. Zuri's voice carried across the square, unwavering as she continued. She spoke of every intercepted letter, every hidden ledger, every whispered plot, each revelation like a hammer striking at the foundation of their deceit. The villagers were forced to witness the consequences of their silence, to confront the truths they had tried to ignore or conceal. Some turned away in shame, others stood frozen in disbelief, and a few fled entirely, unable to bear the exposure of their own actions. The weight of the letter's power, amplified by Zuri's rightful claim to her name, pressed upon the village like a gathering storm. Lightning flickered across the horizon, though no rain fell, and the wind seemed to echo her words, carrying them farther than her voice alone could reach. The square trembled beneath the intensity of revelation, and Zuri felt a surge of clarity as she continued to read. Every syllable reminded those present that deception could not endure in the presence of truth. The stolen name had been a chain, and she had broken it, letting the consequences of hidden greed and betrayal ripple outward in waves of undeniable reality. Marana fell to her knees, clutching her skirts in desperation, while Jano's hands shook as he tried to rationalize the chaos that had unfolded. Villagers whispered among themselves, some beginning to confess, some attempting to justify their actions, but Zuri did not pause. The letter's glow pulsed in harmony with her voice, and she felt the ancestral power behind her name flowing through her, amplifying every word, every revelation, every act of justice being born in that moment. By the time the final lines of the letter were read aloud, the village was transformed. The air, once heavy with tension and secrecy, was now charged with clarity and truth. The guilty were exposed, the hidden conspiracies laid bare, and the power dynamics that had once favored deceit were irrevocably shifted. Zuri stood in the center of the square, radiant and unshakable, her name no longer stolen but fully reclaimed. The letter, its purpose fulfilled, pulsed one last time and then settled in her hands, quiet yet alive, a testament to the power that identity carries when recognized and wielded. As the villagers processed the revelations, Zuri felt neither triumph nor malice, only the quiet strength of one who had endured, observed, and now reclaimed her rightful place. The night had been a reckoning, a turning point that would echo for generations. Her name, once sold and suppressed, had returned with force, and the village would remember that the power of truth, carried in a single voice and a living letter, could not be silenced. The village square, once trembling under the weight of revealed secrets, began to shift in ways no one could have predicted. As Zuri held the letter firmly in her hands, the glow that had pulsed with each revelation seemed to expand, touching the very soil beneath her feet. The air grew thick with a strange energy, charged and almost tangible, as if the land itself had awoken in response to the truth she had spoken aloud. The whispers of the letter had become a roar, carrying the power of her name beyond words, summoning forces that had long lain dormant, forces of justice that no deceit or greed could contain. Those who had betrayed her, who had conspired to suppress her identity, began to feel the weight of consequences as though the earth itself were exacting judgment. Marana clutched at her skirts, her breath ragged, while Jano's bravado shattered completely, leaving only trembling uncertainty. Traitors, neighbors, and even the elders who had silently condoned her family's schemes now found themselves confronted by a force they could neither negotiate nor evade. Secrets that had been buried, carefully hidden beneath layers of lies, emerged in spectral forms, echoes of truth made manifest, demanding acknowledgement and reparation. Zuri walked slowly through the chaos, her steps measured, her eyes steady. Each stride radiated calm authority, a silent assertion that she was no longer the invisible girl her stepfamily had attempted to erase. The letter's glow followed her, illuminating the truth in every corner, revealing every act of greed, manipulation, and cowardice. With every person it touched, the energy of her name reshaped the environment, turning deception into accountability, indifference into awareness, and fear into a recognition of justice long deferred. No one could escape the reckoning. Contracts and hidden agreements fluttered like living pages in the wind, displaying the full extent of their complicity. Misdeeds were mirrored back to their perpetrators in vivid, undeniable clarity. Each person who had sought to profit from her suppression now faced their own reflection in the light of the letter, confronted by the consequences of their actions. The village trembled not out of fear of Zuri herself, but from the unstoppable force that her identity and name carried, an ancient, living justice that recognized truth and demanded it be acknowledged. Yet Zuri herself remained untouched by chaos, calm in her authority, grounded in the certainty of her reclaimed self. Her name, once stolen, had become a beacon of power and recognition, linking her to the past, the spirits of her lineage, and the living world around her. Every whisper of the letter, every pulse of its glow, reinforced that the injustice she had suffered was being corrected, not through vengeance but through the unerring balance of truth. By the time the night began to yield to the first hints of dawn, the village had been transformed. The guilty had faced the consequences of their actions, the webs of deceit were dismantled, and the power that had once been denied Zuri had returned fully to her. She walked through the square with quiet dignity, her identity restored, unshakable and radiant, a living testament to the force that a name recognized and honored could wield. The unseen justice that had risen at her command would remain in the village's memory, a reminder that even the most carefully hidden wrongdoing could not escape the reckoning carried by truth, courage, and the enduring power of one reclaimed identity. The days after the reckoning were unlike any the village had ever seen. Zuri moved through the streets with a quiet dignity that drew attention without demanding it, her presence radiating the authority she had reclaimed. Where once she had been invisible, dismissed, and ignored, she was now a living symbol of power, resilience, and the undeniable force of truth. Her name, restored in full, had become more than a personal identity, it had become a law, a prophecy, and a warning all at once. The letter, imbued with the essence of her true self, had transformed from a mere object of revelation into a living testament of the power carried by a name rightly acknowledged. Everywhere she went, the villagers remembered what had occurred that fateful night. The conspiracies laid bare, the treachery exposed, and the justice enacted through her name had left an indelible mark. Traitors who had once whispered behind closed doors, elders who had feigned ignorance, and even her stepfamily were forced to reckon with the consequences of their actions. Marana and Jano, once confident in their ability to dominate, now moved through the village under the weight of shame and fear, their arrogance permanently subdued. Yet Zuri bore no cruelty toward them. Her strength was measured, tempered by the knowledge that her power was not meant for vengeance alone but for the establishment of truth, recognition, and balance. The single letter that had guided her through her journey pulsed with quiet energy, a vessel for her name's enduring force. Scholars and elders alike began to study it, recognizing that the power it carried was unique, a living link between her identity and the very essence of justice. Laws that had been unwritten were enforced simply through the acknowledgement of her name. The moral compass of the village shifted subtly but irrevocably. Stories of her reclamation spread beyond the village, reaching distant towns where names carried weight and honor was tied to identity. Zuri's letter became a symbol of authority that could not be challenged, a proof that identity and truth, once restored, could reshape communities and command respect across generations. Even in quiet moments, the wind seemed to carry her presence. As villagers walked through fields, crossed rivers, or climbed hillsides, they whispered her name unconsciously, a sound that rustled leaves, stirred dust, and carried with it the weight of lesson and caution. It became a reminder that stealing a person's identity could never silence the truth, that those who attempted to manipulate or erase another's essence would always face exposure. Children grew up hearing the story of the girl whose name was sold but returned with force, learning that courage and resilience, when combined with knowledge and identity, could overturn even the most entrenched systems of deceit. Zuri herself never relied on speech or grand gestures to maintain her authority. Her name, carried in her letter, her actions, and her calm confidence, spoke for her. Villagers, merchants, and even strangers recognized the power she wielded without needing to witness any display of violence or intimidation. Her presence alone was a testament, a living prophecy, and her letter continued to glow faintly in private moments, a reminder that the essence of a person could never truly be stolen, only ignored until claimed. As years passed, Zuri's legend grew. She was sought not only for her wisdom but for her judgment. When disputes arose, her counsel was heeded, her name invoked as authority, and her letter consulted as a source of insight and justice. Yet she remained humble, aware that the true force lay not in pride or dominance, but in the recognition of identity, the reclamation of truth, and the protection of those who might otherwise be silenced. Even after Zuri's time, long after she had walked beyond the village, the wind carried whispers of her name. Travelers passing through spoke of a woman whose single letter had changed the course of a village, whose power lay in identity restored, whose courage had become law and prophecy. Those who attempted deceit, theft, or manipulation felt the weight of her legacy, a subtle pressure in the air reminding them that names and truth could not be erased. Zuri's story became timeless. Her single letter, infused with the essence of her true name, endured as law, prophecy, and warning. She had proven that identity is a force of nature, a conduit of justice, and a light that even the darkest deception cannot extinguish. Her life was a testament. The stolen can be restored, the silenced can command, and the truth, carried in a single name, will always find its voice. The wind itself continued to whisper her name, a gentle but unyielding reminder that no matter how deep the attempts to suppress it, the essence of a person, once reclaimed, cannot be silenced.